D2 partial agonism also makes an antipsychotic atypical. Some atypical antipsychotics stabilizes dopamine neurotransmission in a state between silent antagonism and full agonist action by acting as a partial agonist at D2 receptors. Many degrees of partial agonism are possible between these two extremes. As stated many times in previous chapters, partial agonists are sometimes called Goldilocks drugs if they get the balance just right and cause signal transduction from the receptor to be intermediate between full output and no output. Interestingly, a very small amount of signal transduction through D2 receptors in the striatum by a partial agonist is needed to avoid extrapyramidal side effects. Thus, a very slight degree of partial agonist property, sometimes called the intrinsic activity, can have a very different set of clinical consequences. Just slightly too close to a pure antagonist, that is, too far to the left, and it is just a conventional antipsychotic with EPS and akathisia, unless it has other 5-HT2A or 1A properties to compensate for this. And on the other end, just slightly too far to the right, and it is an atypical antipsychotic without EPS or akathisia, but one that is too activating, capable of worsening positive symptoms of schiz and also causing intolerable nausea and vomiting. And thus, the elusive Goldilocks solution of a drug is a tolerable high-dose antipsychotic without EPS and a tolerable low-dose antidepressant. Sulpride and amisulpride are just barely off the antagonistic part of the spectrum without sufficient 5-HT2A or 1A action, and have low but not zero EPS with robust antipsychotic activities at high doses, plus anecdotal but not well-tested antidepressant and negative symptoms clinical action at low doses. The first dart thrown at the partial agonist spectrum was OPC 4392. It landed too close to the agonist part of the curve, improved negative symptoms of schiz, but it also activated positive symptoms, so was never marketed. Another dart closer to the antagonist part of the spectrum landed in the form of aripiprazole. It ameliorated positive symptoms without activating negative symptoms at higher antipsychotic doses, while proving to be an antidepressant at lower doses. Still has some akathisia, and some thought this was because it might be a bit too close to the antagonist end of the spectrum. Another dart called, now I might be pronouncing this wrong, bifepronox, was aimed further up the spectrum, landing as more of an agonist than aripiprazole but less of an agonist than OPC, but turned out to be too much of an agonist, causing nausea and vomiting from its dopamine agonist and 5-HT1A partial agonist actions. Two more agents with antagonistic actions greater than aripiprazole are in late stage clinical testing, namely a second PIP, brexpiprazole, and the RIP, cariprazine.